On the very first day, my son officially took the CEO chair. Security escorted me out of the lobby of the company I built from nothing. I own 80% of the shares. Yet he chose money over his own mother. But he has no idea that a dusty file sits in my kitchen drawer at home. Any lawyer who reads it will lose sleep, and his first day in power will mark the beginning of his end. My name is Eleanor Whitford, and at 63 years old, I stood in the lobby of the building that bears the name I invented, wearing a vintage Chanel suit that cost less than the marble tile under my heels. I had arrived early at the Aureliax Futures Group headquarters in the Rockdale Financial District, ready to watch my son, Caleb, take the stage. It was supposed to be his coronation. I never imagined it would be my execution. I pressed my access card against the scanner at the turnstile. Instead of the welcoming green chime I had heard for 20 years, a harsh buzzer sounded. A red light flashed, violent and refusing. "Ma'am, please step back," a security guard said. He was new. He did not look me in the eye. "There must be a mistake," I said, my voice steady despite the sudden cold prickle of sweat on my neck. "I am the founder. Try it again." "There is no mistake. Ms. Whitford," he replied, blocking my path with a stiff arm. "We received orders from above. Your clearance has been revoked. I need to take that badge." He snatched the plastic rectangle from my hand before I could protest. I looked past him at the digital directory on the wall. My eyes scanned the list of the board of directors. My name was gone. I pulled out my phone to check my corporate email, but the screen simply read, "Account disabled." Outside the glass walls, I could see a maintenance crew painting over the sign that used to say, "Reserved for Eleanor Whitford." It now read, "Executive Management Area." Then I saw him. Caleb walked into the lobby surrounded by a phalanx of shareholders and mid-level managers. He looked handsome in his Italian suit, the very picture of modern success. He stopped when he saw the commotion. For a split second, his mask slipped. He did not look surprised. He looked guilty. Then the mask returned. Mom, Caleb called out, his voice pitched high with feigned confusion. "What is going on? Some kind of technical glitch." He did not come closer. He stayed safely behind his wall of sycophants. A young woman in a sharp grey suit stepped between us. I recognized her as Gwen Ralston, the corporate attorney Caleb had insisted on hiring last month. She held out a thick manila envelope. "Miss Whitford," Gwen said, her voice devoid of warmth. "This is a formal notification. The board has passed a resolution declaring you administratively incapacitated. Based on the standing power of attorney you signed, your voting rights have been permanently transferred to the acting CEO." "I never signed anything like that," I snapped. "You did," Gwen replied, thrusting the envelope into my hands. "It is all legal. Please escort Miss Whitford out. She is causing a disturbance." I stood frozen. I looked around the soaring glass atrium. I remembered when this company was just me, scrubbing the concrete floor of a freezing warehouse until my knuckles bled. I remembered begging the bank for a $500 loan just to make payroll for my first 3 employees. I had built this empire with sweat and tears, and now they were packing my entire life into a legal loophole. The guards took my elbows. As they turned me toward the revolving doors, I slid my hand into my pocket and quietly swiped the record button on my phone. As I was pushed toward the exit, I heard a laugh from the group behind me. "Finally," a man's voice whispered, loud enough for my microphone to catch. "Congrats. Caleb, you really solved the old lady problem." I was shoved out onto the cold pavement. The wind bit through my jacket, high above. The external speakers piped the audio from the lobby ceremony to the street. Caleb's voice boomed out, magnified and distorted. "Welcome, everyone," my son said. "Today marks a new era. We are no longer burdened by old legacies and personal emotions. We are moving forward." I stood alone on the sidewalk, clutching the envelope. The glass tower loomed over me, reflecting the grey sky. They thought they had won. They thought I was just a fragile old woman who would go home and knit. "If you think I am old, stupid, and lonely," I whispered to the cold wind, "you will soon understand what happens when you cross an old woman who owns 80% of the company and has absolutely nothing left to lose." The wind on the street corner felt biting, but it was nothing compared to the chill of the unheated warehouse floor where Aureliacs began. My mind drifted back more than 4 decades, stripping away the high-rise glass and the designer suit until I was just Eleanor again, 20 years old and drowning in debt. I was working the night shift at a packaging plant in a gritty industrial town out west. My ex-husband had vanished, leaving me with a newborn Caleb and $5,000 in unpaid medical bills. While other girls my age were going to dances, I was lugging crates and breathing in dust. But it was there, amidst the roar of machinery, that I saw the waste. Thousands of pounds of perfectly good surplus materials were being incinerated simply because no one wanted to sort them. "You are looking at that trash like it is gold." Eleanor, the old plant accountant, Mr. Henderson, told me one night during a break. "It is not trash," I replied, wiping grease from my forehead. "It is inventory that just lost its way. If I could redirect it to small repair shops." I spent my lunch breaks reading library books on management. Mr. Henderson taught me how to balance a ledger. When I finally launched Aureliacs Futures, it was not a corporation. It was a damp, rented garage that smelled of mildew. I could not afford drivers, so I drove the delivery truck myself. I remember lifting 50-pound boxes until my back screamed, then coming home to scrub stains out of Caleb's clothes by hand because we could not afford a laundromat. Our first big break nearly killed us. A logistics error ruined a shipment for a local supermarket chain. The damages were $12,000. I had exactly $400 in the bank. "You are finished." "Whitford," the supermarket manager had shouted at me over the phone, "I am suing you for everything." "You do not need to sue me," I told him, my voice shaking but firm. "I will make it right. You have my word. I sold the only thing I owned, the small house my parents had left me." We moved into a rental apartment that shuddered every time a train passed. But I paid that manager every single cent. From that day on, the word on the street was that Eleanor Whitford's promise was as solid as rock. Caleb grew up in that cold warehouse. He spent his summers labeling boxes and watching me negotiate. I wanted him to see the sweat behind the dollar. "Why do we not sell to the big investors?" "Mum," he asked me once when he was 16, watching a venture capitalist drive away in a Porsche. "He offered you millions." "Because," I said, looking at my floor manager who was saving for his daughter's college tuition, "those men would fire half our people to save a decimal point. These people are family. We do not sell family." I held on to 80% of the shares to ensure no one could ever hurt my workers. But then came the winter I turned 52. A severe case of pneumonia landed me in the intensive care unit. I lay there, gasping for air, terrified that I would die and leave Caleb unprepared. A lawyer, recommended by a partner I trusted, hurried to my bedside with a stack of documents. "It is just standard procedure. Eleanor, the lawyer had said, pushing a pen into my trembling hand. Protective measures. Just in case you do not make it through the night. It gives Caleb the power to keep the lights on. My vision was blurry from fever. I could barely breathe, let alone read the fine print. I looked at Caleb, who was standing in the doorway looking terrified. And I signed. I signed page after page, thinking I was saving him. When I recovered, those papers were filed away and forgotten. I only remembered a vague discussion about power of attorney. But I noticed a change. Caleb stopped coming to the warehouse floor. He started accepting dinner invitations from hedge fund managers. He traded his jeans for tailored suits. And the boy who used to label boxes began to look at our company not as a family, but as a harvest waiting to be reaped. As Aureliax expanded into a multi-state corporation, the warehouse chill was replaced by the hum of central air conditioning. But a different kind of coldness began to seep into my life. I brought Caleb in as chief operating officer to ease him into the role. I remained CEO, but the generational divide was immediate. I managed by walking the floor and knowing the names of my employees' children. Caleb managed by staring at spreadsheets and talking about efficiency metrics. Then he introduced Marina. She is a financial consultant. Mom, Caleb told me over dinner, his eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen in years. She knows everyone on Wall Street. Marina was beautiful in a terrifying way. She wore suits that looked like armor, and while her mouth was always curved into a polite smile, her eyes were like scanners at a checkout counter, assessing the value of everything they touched. She never looked at me as a mother. She looked at me as an asset. You are an icon. Eleanor? Marina said during our second meeting, tapping on her tablet. We need to leverage that. Your story. The single mother? The factory floor. It is gold for the brand. I will set up your LinkedIn and handle the press. You be the face of the legacy. Let Caleb be the face of the future strategy. It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like I was being slowly pushed into a museum display case. A few weeks later, an email arrived from a law firm I did not recognize, Astor and Twill. Marina had recommended them. The subject line read, Estate Planning and Administrative Burden Reduction. They suggested a long-term power of attorney structure to streamline operations and protect the family legacy. I ignored it until the evening after my minor eye surgery. My vision was swimming in a haze of antibiotic ointment, and my head throbbed. I was sitting on the edge of my hospital bed, waiting to be discharged, when Caleb walked in with a thick folder. Mom, I know you are tired, he said, his voice soft and soothing. But the legal team needs these signed tonight to process the new vendor contracts. And there is that updated power of attorney we talked about. It is just a formality, just protection for you, in case anything happens. I squinted at the pages. The black text was nothing but grey smudges. I cannot read this. Caleb? I said, rubbing my temple. Trust me. Mom, he said, placing the pen in my hand. It is standard stuff. The nurse is waiting to wheel you out. Let's just get it done so you can go home and sleep. I looked at his face, distorted by my poor vision, and I saw the little boy who used to help me label boxes. I trusted him. I signed my name again and again, guided by his finger pointing to the signature lines. The uneasiness started a month later. I began receiving notifications on my phone. Strange alerts from the bank regarding consultations with authorized representative Caleb Whitford concerning asset leverage and strategic loans. I had never authorized a loan. We were cash positive, Caleb. I asked him one afternoon in his office, "Why is the bank emailing me about mortgaging the distribution center?" He laughed, a sound that felt too practiced. "Oh, that ignore it. Mom, the bank's system is ancient. They just auto-generated some updates because I updated the authorized user list. It means nothing." Before I could press him, my phone pinged with a message from Marina. She had sent a 50-page PDF file. "Do not worry. Eleanor." Her text read, "You still own everything. Caleb is just signing the boring administrative stuff so you do not have to enjoy your garden. I might have let it go if not for Thomas. He had been my floor manager for 20 years. He caught me by the coffee machine one rainy Tuesday, looking over his shoulder. "Ms. Whitford," he whispered, his voice low. "I should not ask. But are you retiring sooner than we thought?" "What do you mean?" "Thomas, well." He shifted uncomfortably. "The strategy meetings. They are always scheduled when you are at your doctor's appointments or out of town. And on the minutes last week, you were listed as honorary chairman, not CEO." A cold knot tightened in my stomach. That night, I did not go to sleep. Instead, I bought a simple black notebook. I began to write. I logged every email timestamp. I recorded the dates of the meetings I missed. I wrote down how, at the last 3 company galas, Caleb had aggressively tried to refill my champagne glass, urging me to drink more, so I did not have to listen to the boring numbers. I looked at the notebook, filled with my jagged handwriting, and realized I was no longer running a company. I was gathering evidence at a crime scene, and the suspects were eating Sunday dinner at my table. The suffocating feeling started on a Tuesday morning with a phone call from a number I did not recognize. "Ms. Whitford." The voice on the other end said, sharp and fast, "This is Mark Salinger from the Financial Times. Do you have a comment on the rumor that Aureliax is selling 35% of its logistics division to a foreign equity fund?" I froze, my hand tightening around my coffee mug. "I do not comment on market speculation," I said, reciting the standard line, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. I hung up and immediately opened my laptop. I tried to log into the internal data room where we kept our transaction records. I typed my password, the same one I had used for years. The screen flashed. "Access restricted." I tried again. "User level insufficient." I navigated to the user permissions page, which was still viewable to general staff. The folder labeled Strategic Transactions was now tagged Executive Management Only. When I clicked the list of authorized users, my name was gone. Later that evening, the betrayal followed me home. In my mailbox, nestled between a utility bill and a flyer for pizza, was a thick envelope. It was addressed to Caleb, but the mail carrier had slipped it into my box by mistake, likely because our last names were the same and he used my address for his tax filings. It was a final notice from a private bank. The sum was staggering. He owed $4 million on a personal loan, and the collateral listed was Class A common stock, Aureliax Futures Group. I drove straight back to the office. Caleb was in the glass-walled conference room, staring at a projection of a map. I slammed the letter onto the mahogany table. "You are leveraging my company to pay for your gambling debts," I asked. My voice trembling, not with fear, but with rage. Caleb did not even flinch. He picked up the letter and slid it into his shredder. "It is not gambling, Mom," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "It is personal leverage strategy. You do not understand modern liquidity. If you keep obstructing the financial flow, the board will have to take a vote. I am the board, I said. Are you? He asked, looking right through me. 2 days later, Marina invited me to lunch, but instead of a restaurant, she drove me to a quiet office building in the suburbs. It is just a wellness check. Eleanor, she said, smiling that plastic smile. Our insurance requires it for all senior executives, just to rule out age-related liabilities. The doctor was a man I had never met. He asked me questions that felt like traps. Then he pushed a form across the desk. This is just a standard acknowledgement, the doctor said. It says you admit to experiencing occasional anxiety and memory lapses. It helps with the premium rates. I looked at the paper. The legal language was specific. It was not about insurance. It was an admission of cognitive decline. If I signed this, I was handing them the proof they needed to activate the incapacity clause in the power of attorney I had blindly signed in the hospital. I am not signing that, I said, standing up. Eleanor. Marina started, her voice dropping into a fake, concerned whisper. Do not be difficult. Caleb is just trying to protect you. I walked out. But before I did, I pretended to fumble with my purse and snapped a photo of the document with my phone. That night, my phone buzzed. It was Nora Finley, a board member who owned a chain of restaurants. I had helped her when her husband died. Eleanor, Nora said, her voice barely audible. I cannot talk long. Caleb held a closed-door meeting. He is talking about a structural pivot. He called it reducing dependence on legacy family shareholders. I hung up and sat in the dark of my kitchen. I realized then that my son did not just want to run the company. He wanted to erase me from it. Every paper I had signed, every meeting I had missed, every administrative update had been a brick in the wall he was building to lock me out. I did not cry. I stood up and went to my study. I pulled out an external hard drive. For the next 5 hours, I downloaded everything I could still access. I saved every email where Caleb mentioned strategy, every altered meeting minute, and the photo of the fake medical form. When the download was complete, I did not put the drive in my safe. That was the first place they would look. Instead, I went to the kitchen. I opened the cabinet above the stove and pulled out an old, grease-stained tin box where I kept my handwritten recipe cards. I tucked the sleek, black hard drive behind a card for apple pie. Let them look for digital footprints, I whispered to the empty room. They will never look in the past. I did not go home after the security guards escorted me to the curb. I could not bear the silence of my empty kitchen. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to a diner that smelled of burnt grease and cheap disinfectant. I ordered a black coffee and spread the crumpled copy of the board resolution on the sticky table. My hands were shaking, but my eyes were finally clear. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was my name, in my handwriting, but the stroke was weak. The loop of the W trailed off into a jagged line. It was the signature of a woman who could barely see. I realized with a sick jolt that this was the signature I had scrawled in the hospital recovery room, blinded by ointment and trust. I left a $5 bill on the table and hailed a cab. I gave the driver an address in a neighborhood that had not been fashionable since the 80s. I was looking for Winston Hale. 15 years ago, he had been the opposing counsel in a patent lawsuit against Aureliacs. He had lost, but he had fought like a wolf. I remembered him telling me in the hallway that I was too soft for this shark tank. His office was a cramped room above a dry cleaner, filled with stacks of paper that looked like they might topple over if someone sneezed. Winston looked older, his hair thinning, but his eyes were still sharp. He did not offer me coffee. So, Winston said, leaning back in his creaking chair, the Queen of Aureliax has been dethroned. I would say I told you so, but I charge $400 an hour for that. Read this, I said, sliding the resolution across his cluttered desk. He put on his reading glasses and scanned the document. At first, his expression was bored. Then, he stopped. He flipped the page, then flipped it back. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him and started taking notes. This is a mess, Eleanor, Winston said, tapping the paper. This power of attorney you signed with Astor and Twill. It gives Caleb the right to vote your shares in all shareholder meetings unless you specifically revoke it in writing. But this is the dagger. He pointed to a paragraph labeled Annex B. According to this, Winston continued, his voice dropping an octave. 8 months ago, you voluntarily stepped down as CEO due to health concerns and accepted the role of honorary chairman with no executive power. Did you sign this? No, I said, my voice rising. I never saw that page in my life. Look closer, Winston said. He held up the document. The first page, the one with the preamble, had my initials. The last page had my shaky hospital signature. But the middle 3 pages, the ones containing the resignation clause, were on slightly brighter paper. It is the oldest trick in the book, Winston said, disgust curling his lip. They got you to sign a stack of documents, probably clipped together. Then they swapped out the middle pages for new terms. You signed the back page. So it looks like you agreed to the whole thing. It is fraud, but proving it is a nightmare. I felt a wave of nausea. I had not just been robbed. I had handed them the keys. I was so stupid. I whispered, covering my face with my hands. I let him do this. I raised a wolf and fed him my hand. Stop it, Winston snapped. Your mistake was moral. You trusted your son. His mistake is criminal. He committed fraud. The courts distinguish very clearly between the two. He stood up and began pacing the small room. We have 2 moves, Winston said. First, we go nuclear on the administrative side. We file a formal revocation of all powers of attorney with the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately. That kills his voting rights. Second, we need dirt. If he forged this, he is using that power for self-dealing. We need to prove he is acting against the company's interest, not just yours. I cannot access my accounts. I said, they locked me out. I cannot pay you a retainer today. I do not want a check today. Winston said, I want to win, but I need collateral for the filing fees. Take my car. I said instantly, it is a 2-year-old Mercedes, and I will sign over 20% of my next dividend payout. We shook hands. His grip was dry and firm. I walked out of his office as the sun was setting. I felt lighter, colder, and sharper. I pulled a burner phone from my pocket, one I had bought at a convenience store on the way over. I dialed a number I knew by heart. Hello? A hesitant voice answered. Thomas, I said. Do not use my name. Listen to me very carefully. I need you to go to the security server room. I need the footage from the hallway outside my office from this morning. Specifically, I need to see who ordered the locks changed. And Thomas? Check the email logs. Find the exact time the order was sent to lock my accounts. Ms. Whitford, Thomas whispered, sounding terrified. They said you were sick. I am not sick, Thomas, I said, staring at the distant lights of the city. I am just waking up. The air inside the Securities and Exchange Commission office was sterile and smelled of dry toner, a stark contrast to the chaotic storm brewing in my life. Winston placed a heavy stack of documents on the clerk's counter with a satisfying thud. "This is a formal revocation of power of attorney for Eleanor Whitford," Winston told the clerk, his voice clipping the air like scissors, "and a mandatory update of the major shareholder registry. Ms. Whitford is reasserting control over her 80% stake, effective immediately." The clerk stamped the papers. Thump, thump. The sound was like a heartbeat returning to a dead body, legally. Caleb was now flying a plane with no engine, and he did not even know it yet. Back in Winston's cramped office, we worked in silence. Winston had already fired off a demand letter to Astor and Twill, requesting the original metadata for the estate planning documents. While he argued on the phone, my burner phone buzzed. It was a secure file transfer from Thomas. I clicked play on the video file. The grain was heavy, but the faces were clear. It was the boardroom, recorded 2 days ago. Caleb sat at the head of the table, flanked by Marina and Gwen Ralston. They were speaking to 3 men in expensive suits, representatives from the Foreign Equity Fund. "We need to accelerate the asset sale." I heard Caleb say through the tinny speakers, "My mother is becoming unstable. We need the liquidity locked in before she causes a scene. The valuation is low," Caleb, one of the investors, noted. "Just get it done," Marina interjected, her voice sharp. "We need the cash infusion by Friday." I watched, sickened, as Gwen nodded. "I can draft the expedited closing documents. We will use the standing proxy to bypass the shareholder vote." Winston leaned over my shoulder. "Look at this email Thomas just forwarded," he said, pointing to a printed sheet. It was an internal memo. Caleb had used his proxy power, my power, to pre-approve a performance bonus for the executive team upon the successful sale of the logistics division. The amount for himself and Marina was $2 million each. "He is not just stealing the company," I said, my voice cold. "He is gutting it for pocket change." I needed to know how deep the rot went. I arranged a meeting with Nora Finley at a dim jazz bar on the edge of town. Nora looked tired, stirring her martini nervously. "I am sorry, Eleanor," Nora said, refusing to meet my eyes. But in the closed session, Gwen Ralston was very convincing. She told us we did not need to wait for your input. She said you had already signed everything away because you knew you were losing your mind. And you believed her. I asked. "I did not want to," Nora whispered. But Caleb was so confident. And the legal paperwork? It looked solid. They said it was drafted by your old counsel. That gave it credibility. I froze. "My old counsel? You mean Martin Clark?" "Yes," Nora said. "He is a senior partner at Astor and Twill now. Didn't you know the glass in my hand nearly shattered? Martin Clark had been my lawyer for 20 years. He was the one who helped me incorporate. He had held Caleb as a baby." I rushed back to Winston's office. "Check the personnel list for Astor and Twill," I demanded. Winston typed furiously. "Here he is. Martin Clark. Senior partner. Mergers and acquisitions." Winston dug deeper into the discovery pile he had managed to pull from the firm's leaked metadata. He found it an email chain between Marina and Martin Clark. "Read this," Winston said, his voice grim. The subject line was Draft Annex B, confidential. The timestamp was 3:00 a.m., the night before my eye surgery. "Martin." The email from Marina read, Make sure the resignation clause is on a separate page. We will slip it into the stack when she is groggy. Do not let her read the details. Just get the signature. I stared at the screen. The betrayal of a son is a sharp knife, but the betrayal of a lifelong friend is a blunt object that crushes your bones. I had not just been outsmarted by a greedy child. I had been hunted by a pack of wolves I had fed with my own hands. We have them, Winston said, looking at the email. This proves conspiracy to commit fraud. We can go to the police right now. No, I said. I stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city skyline where the Aureliax logo glowed in the distance. If we go to the police, it gets buried in investigation for months. Caleb will claim it was a misunderstanding. He will spin it. Then what do you want to do? Winston asked. We do not tell Caleb I revoked the power of attorney, I said, turning back to him. Let him walk into the shareholder meeting tomorrow thinking he owns me. Let him stand on that stage and lie to the world. And then, I said, feeling a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest. I will walk in, and I will burn his little kingdom to the ground on a live stream. I stood before the mirror in my cramped kitchen, my reflection framed by peeling wallpaper. I was not rehearsing a plea for mercy. I was rehearsing an indictment. I watched my own lips move, stripping away the tremble, until my voice was as cold and hard as the concrete floor of my first warehouse. I was no longer a mother grieving a lost child. I was a prosecutor preparing to close a case. I picked up the phone and dialed Frank, the owner of a small fleet of repair trucks who had been with us since the beginning. Frank, I said, skipping the pleasantries. Tomorrow is the shareholder meeting. I need you to log in. And tell Sarah at the transport depot to do the same. Is everything okay? Eleanor Frank asked. No, I replied. But it will be. Get ready. Frank, there are going to be big waves. When I vote, you watch me, and you follow. Later that afternoon, I agreed to meet Marina for lunch. She chose a French bistro with white tablecloths and menus without prices. She looked radiant, sipping sparkling water, convinced she had already won. Eleanor, she said, sliding a sleek folder across the table. Caleb and I want you to be happy. We call this the Golden Retirement Package. It is a monthly stipend, very generous, plus full medical coverage. All you have to do is relax, stay home, let the new generation handle the stress. I looked at the folder. It was a bribe wrapped in silk. I reached into my purse, ostensibly to find my reading glasses, and ensured my phone was recording. I let my shoulders slump, feigning defeat. I am just so tired. Marina, I said, forcing a tremor into my voice. I do not know if I have the fight left in me. But is this legal? If I contest the power of attorney? Marina smiled, a predator seeing a wounded gazelle. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Look, Eleanor, she said, take the deal. Even if you sue, the papers are already on our side. You signed them, and you know how lawsuits are. They take years. Do you really want to spend your last years in a courtroom? We have the board. We have the votes. It is over. I nodded slowly, looking down at my lap to hide the fire in my eyes. I suppose. You are right. That evening, I sat in my living room and opened my laptop. Caleb had posted a long status update on social media. It was a photo of him looking out a window, pensive and serious. The caption read, "True leadership means making hard choices. Sometimes, we must be brave enough to move forward, even when it means leaving loved ones behind who can no longer keep up with the pace of innovation. It is painful, but necessary for growth. The post had thousands of likes. The financial press was quoting it as a sign of his maturity. He truly believed he was the hero of this story. He did not see himself as a traitor. He saw himself as a visionary, unburdened by a dead weight. That dead weight was me. My email pinged. It was Winston. The subject line was battle plan. He had laid out the sequence perfectly: when to interrupt, exactly when to demand the credential check, and a contingency plan in case Caleb tried to cut the live feed. Then, a message arrived from Nora Finley. It was just an audio file with no text. I clicked play. It was a recording of a private pre-meeting session. Caleb's voice was unmistakable. "Do not worry about her suing," Caleb said on the recording, his tone dismissive. "We have already logged the cognitive decline narrative. My lawyer says that with the medical acknowledgement she refused to sign, which we noted in the file as non-compliance due to confusion, her chances of winning are basically zero. She is past her prime. No judge will trust her memory over my documentation." I sat in the silence of my home. The pain was gone. The shock was gone. All that remained was a crystalline clarity. I opened an old folder on my computer. I watched a grainy video from 20 years ago. It was the company Christmas party in the warehouse. I was handing out bonus checks. Caleb was there, a teenager, handing out plates of food. The workers were laughing, hugging me, thanking me for saving their jobs during the recession. They think this is about money. I whispered to the empty room. I closed the laptop. I did not sleep. I sat in the dark, drinking tea, waiting for the sun to rise on the day my son would learn that he had not just stolen a company, he had awakened a force of nature. Tomorrow, I said to the shadows, I am not just defending my assets. I am defending the value of my entire life. The auditorium hummed with the low vibration of expensive air conditioning and polite ambition. It felt less like a business meeting and more like a tribunal held inside a diamond. The walls were glass, the floor was polished stone, and the air smelled of stale coffee and tension. Caleb stood on the stage, backlit by a massive LED screen displaying soaring graphs and maps of foreign markets. "We are shedding the dead weight of the past," Caleb announced, his voice smooth and practiced. "By divesting the logistics arm, we unlock capital for global expansion. This is the future of Aureliax, a future unburdened by nostalgia." Applause broke out. It was polite, rhythmic, and sickening. He looked like a king up there, accepting the tribute of the people he was about to rob. Gwen Ralston stepped up to the podium as the clapping subsided. She adjusted her glasses, looking efficient and untouchable. "We will now proceed to the formal voting," Gwen said, confirming the share structure. "Ms. Eleanor Whitford is absent, per the standing filing in the data room. Her voting proxy is assigned to CEO Caleb Whitford for all agenda items." I pushed the double doors open. They swung back with a heavy, hydraulic hiss that cut through the silence like a gunshot. Every head turned. The sound of 300 people holding their breath is distinctive. I saw Caleb's smile freeze, then shatter into a look of pure confusion. Marina, sitting in the front row, went the colour of old paper. I walked down the centre aisle. My heels clicked against the polished floor, a steady, rhythmic countdown. I did not look at the shareholders. I looked straight at my son. I took the empty seat in the front row, directly across from the podium. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single document, stamped with the seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission just 24 hours ago. "Let the minutes reflect," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone, "that Eleanor Whitford is present. I am the controlling shareholder with 80% of the equity, and all prior proxies have been revoked as of yesterday afternoon." You cannot be here," Gwen stammered, her composure cracking as she looked from me to Caleb. "The protocol. The medical restriction." "Objection!" A voice boomed from the back of the room. Winston Hale stood up. He walked forward, plugging a laptop into the presentation console before the tech team could stop him. "I am legal counsel for Ms. Whitford, and I am serving you with a cease and desist on this fraudulent proceeding." Before Caleb could signal security, Winston hit a key. The soaring graphs behind Caleb vanished. In their place, a grainy email chain appeared on the massive screen, magnified 10 feet tall. "This is an email from Marina to senior partner Martin Clark at Astor & Twill," Winston explained, using a laser pointer to circle the text. "Note the timestamp. Note the IP address coming from the firm's private server. And note the instruction. Swap the annex regarding resignation after the signature is secured. Keep the signature page intact." A gasp rippled through the room. It sounded like a sudden wind tearing through the hall. I stood up and turned to face the room. I saw faces I had known for decades, investors, partners, employees. They waited until I was recovering from surgery. I told them, keeping my hands clasped to hide the rage. They told me I was signing insurance forms. They told me I was signing routine updates. Instead, they were stealing my voice. While I was trusting my son, he was using my shares as collateral for personal loans I never authorized. "This is preposterous," Caleb shouted, gripping the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. She is confused. She has been suffering from cognitive decline for months. We have medical records. She does not know what she is saying. He is lying." Nora Finley stood up from the third row. Her voice was shaking, but loud. I heard him. "In the closed session, he told us not to worry about Eleanor because he had the paperwork rigged. He said we did not need to wait for her death to take the company. He said she was just a hurdle to be cleared." "She is lying too," Caleb screamed, his facade of the cool CEO completely gone. Sweat was beading on his forehead. "My mother is senile. She does not know what day it is. Everything she says is a fabrication of a sick mind." I did not shout back. I simply held up my phone and pressed play near the microphone Winston held out. Marina's voice, clear and distinct, echoed through the hall. "Dad's papers are already on our side. You signed them. And you know how lawsuits are. They take years. Do you really want to spend your last years in a courtroom?" Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. The kind of silence where careers die. Winston stepped forward, his voice like a judge's gavel. "I move to suspend all current resolutions. We are calling for an immediate vote on 2 motions. First, the immediate removal of Caleb Whitford as CEO for cause. Second, the termination of all retainers with Astor and Twill, and the immediate transfer of these evidentiary files to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for a probe into corporate fraud and racketeering." Caleb stood at the podium, his face glistening with a sheen of cold sweat. He looked at the cameras, then at the sea of hostile faces, and finally at me. He tried to summon the charm that had worked on so many investors, but it cracked under the weight of the evidence. I move for a recess, Caleb stammered, holding up a shaking hand. This is clearly a complex misunderstanding. Mum, Eleanor and I need to speak privately. We can clear this up in 10 minutes. He looked at me with pleading eyes, the eyes of a child who had broken a vase and wanted to hide the pieces before his father came home. But I was not his mother in that moment. I was the majority shareholder. Motion denied, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. Whatever I had to say to my son, I said at home. What matters to this company will be said right here, on the record. Winston signalled for the vote. All in favour of the immediate removal of Caleb Whitford as CEO, my hand went up first. It was steady. Behind me. It looked like a wave crashing. Frank, the fleet owner, raised his hand high. Sarah from the depot raised hers. One by one. The small shareholders, the people I had built this company with, the people Caleb called legacy dragging, raised their hands in solidarity. Even the institutional investors, seeing the wind change, slowly raised their hands. They were afraid of losing their investment if they backed a fraudster. The motion carries with 83% of the voting share. Winston announced. Caleb Whitford is effectively terminated. You cannot do this, Marina shrieked from the front row. We have contracts, we have golden parachutes. You are not an employee of this corporation, Winston said, looking at her over his glasses. Security. Please remove the non-shareholder from the floor. Before the guards could reach her, a man in a charcoal suit stood up near the back. It was Mr. Sterling, a representative from one of the largest pension funds. Wait, Sterling said, his voice grave. If we are putting everything on the table, Caleb approached us last week. He pitched a plan to transfer the intellectual property of the logistics division to a holding company in Nevada, a company listed under Marina's management. He said it was to bypass the control of, as he put it, the senile old guard. The room erupted. That was the final nail. It was not just a power grab, it was embezzlement. Gwen Ralston, the young lawyer, looked like she was about to faint. She backed away from Caleb, holding her hands up. I did not know about the shell company. Gwen cried out, her voice shrill. I was just following instructions from Martin Clark. I am just a junior associate. Is that so? Winston asked. He clicked a button on his laptop. A new email appeared on the screen. This is an email from you to your paralegal. Gwen, you specifically instructed them to Photoshop the page numbers to mask the insertion of the resignation annex. Martin did not write this. You did. The board of directors, realizing they were sitting on a powder keg of liability, scrambled to save themselves. The chairman, a man who had ignored my calls for months, stood up and declared that the board would cooperate fully with any federal investigation, and that all contracts with Astor and Twill were immediately suspended. I have a proposal, I said, standing up as the noise reached a fever pitch. The company will cover the legal fees for anyone who comes forward as a truthful witness. But if you try to hide documents or cover for these crimes, you are on your own. The meeting dissolved into chaos. 2 security guards, men Caleb had hired to keep me out, now took him by the arms. He looked back at me, his face a mask of shock, as he was marched toward the exit. The flash of press cameras outside the glass walls blinded him. Marina tried to push past a group of shareholders to follow him. A woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had owned stock since the 90s, blocked her path. Mrs. Higgins held a cup of ice water in her hand. With a quick, sharp motion, she splashed the freezing water directly into Marina's face. "Don't you ever," Mrs. Higgins spat, "lecture us women about a golden retirement package again." Marina gasped, mascara running down her cheeks, and fled the room amidst the jeers. Slowly, the room emptied. The police were waiting in the lobby. The lawyers were gathering their briefcases. Winston gave me a nod and stepped out to handle the press. I remained alone in the vast, glass-walled room. I walked to the head of the table. The microphone was still live, humming with a low static. I placed my hand on the cool leather of the chair where my son had sat just minutes ago, convinced he was untouchable. "You chose money," I whispered to the empty chair. "Now it is my turn to choose justice." 3 weeks after the shareholder meeting, the Department of Justice formally indicted the conspirators for wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit embezzlement. The legal hammer fell with a swiftness that surprised even Winston. Martin Clark was arrested at his country club. The firm of Astor and Twill was facing immediate dissolution, and Gwen Ralston had her law license suspended pending a full ethics review. But the real reckoning happened on my front porch on a rainy Tuesday night. I heard a knock, soft and hesitant. When I opened the door, Caleb was standing there. He was soaked to the bone, his expensive suit ruined, looking more like a lost child than a corporate raider. He dropped to his knees right there on the wet welcome mat. "Mum, please." He sobbed, his hands gripping the railing. "You have to tell them it was a misunderstanding. You have to withdraw the complaint. If Marina's parents find out, if I go to jail, my life is over." I looked down at him. A part of me, the mother who had nursed him through fevers and helped him with homework, wanted to pull him inside and fix it. But the woman who had built an empire from scrap metal stood firm. The case was no longer mine to stop. It belonged to the state. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a photocopy of the indictment I had received that morning. I held it out to him, staying dry behind the threshold. "You have the right to a lawyer," I told him, my voice steady but quiet. "You have the right to speak the truth, but you no longer have the right to use my name to shield yourself from the rain you summoned." Caleb looked up, his face streaked with rain and tears. Then, the confession spilled out of him, desperate and pathetic. "I did not want to hurt you. I just needed to cover the hole." He stammered, shaking. "I lost millions on those futures trades 5 years ago. I was scared to tell you. I thought, if I could just leverage the company, make a big sale, I could pay it back before you noticed. I did not want you to be disappointed in me." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. He had destroyed us not out of pure malice, but out of a cowardly fear of failure. Disappointment is a feeling. "Caleb," I said softly, "fraud is a choice. You chose the crime over the truth." I closed the door. At the sentencing hearing, I did not appear as a mother begging for leniency, nor as a vindictive fury. I appeared as a victim and a shareholder. I gave my testimony clearly, stating exactly what was signed and what was forged. I let the facts speak for themselves. The judge was stern. Caleb received a suspended sentence with 5 years of probation and 2,000 hours of community service. But the real punishment was the lifetime ban from serving as an officer or director of any public company. His career in finance was dead. Marina, who was found to be the architect of the shell companies, was hit with heavy fines and stripped of her licenses. Martin Clark was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. Aureliac's Futures Group needed a new leader. I did not return as CEO. Instead, I appointed Sarah Jenkins, a 42-year-old woman who had started on the sorting line and worked her way up to regional manager. She understood that people, not leverage, were our greatest asset. We began to restructure, paying down the debt slowly and transparently. In a brief press conference outside the courthouse, I announced that I would be directing a portion of my annual dividends to start a legal defense fund for the elderly who had been victims of financial elder abuse. I am not a victim, I told the reporters. I am a warning. That night, back in my small kitchen, I took the black hard drive out of my purse. I placed it back into the battered tin box behind the recipe card for apple pie. I would not need it for revenge anymore, but I would keep it. It was a reminder that trust must always be walked hand in hand with verification. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and stood by the window. In the distance, the Aureliac's tower was just one of many lights in the skyline. It no longer defined me. I took a sip of the hot tea, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. For the first time in months, the silence in the house did not feel lonely. It felt peaceful. I had not just taken back my company. I had taken back the pen that wrote the story of my life. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please drop a comment below and let's get a conversation started. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash that hype button to help this video reach more people who might need to hear it.